All right, so here we go. How's our day? Feeling it? Yeah? It's an eh? Okay. We're a little sparse out here. Eventually they'll show up. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to continue. We'll continue with our study of the Cold War, wrapping all things up here, looking at the collapse of the Soviet Union and of communism. And realistically, when we look at what is happening, again, to communism in the 1980s, many of it, we look at it, there's a lot of internal issues. Externally, again, it's the Cold War in the United States and our allies were putting pressure on the Soviet Union, but realistically, it's a sinking ship in the 1980s. And Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet leader, is going to have a very difficult time. So there's going to be a lot of internal issues going on that's going to contribute to this collapse. What I want to do is I'll start off today, just a little quick little snippet of information. What's happening in the Soviet Union at this time. And they are going to make reference to what we might perceive as the ending of the Cold War because of Germany. What is happening with Germany? And there is connection pieces to the Soviet Union here. So got a little video clip. I want to just start off with that. It'll be about 6 minutes. So not that long, but it'll highlight some of the problems going on in the Soviet Union. And it's going to make an appearance in here. It's always big when the golden arches appear for a reason. All right, so let me get this clip going.
Who died. And that's the truth.
He could allow freedom to the satellites, but would he allow it to the Soviet republics? There were 15 separate republics. Most wanted independence. The Soviet Communist Party was losing control. Goods in the shops were scarce.
We
rightly chose freedom, democracy, glasnost and pluralism. But we got one thing wrong. People judge the state of the country by what they could or couldn't buy in the markets and shops.
Many older people found the pace of change upsetting.
We promised that things would get better, but things were getting worse and worse. We should have allowed freedom of trade, but Gorbachev didn't dare.
Making the transition to a market economy was hard, but they did allow the opening of Moscow's first McDonald's. The young wanted pop music, fashion, the chance to make money, the right to travel.
Society moved on, and the party stayed where it was. People started running like rats from a sinking ship.
Gorbachev gave Soviet citizens for the first time the freedom to demonstrate. Now demonstrations called for an end to the Communist Party's monopoly of power. But communist hardliners opposed reform. Despite them, Gorbachev, himself a communist, chose pluralism. The Communist Party, which had ruled since the October Revolution of 1917, would have to share power with others. It was a complete break with the practice of Lenin and Stalin. Of the 15 republics of the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation was the largest. Most were responding to Gorbachev's loosening control with demands for national freedom. In the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, annexed by Stalin in 1940, The demand was total independence. In January 1990, Gorbachev had gone to Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, to argue that the Soviet Union must not be broken up.
Перестройка, с одной стороны, вот она открыла возможности через демократию, гласность, через признание реальности, а реальность это то, что мы многонациональное государство, и мы должны считаться народами.
Despite Gorbachev, the other Baltic states, Estonia and Latvia, followed Lithuania's lead and also demanded independence.
Была попытка остановить поток.
He was trying to dam a river that was in full flood,
А река была
but the
сильнее,
current was
чем
too strong.
она всё равно
It broke the dam and flooded everything in its path.
сломала всё на своем пути.
Boris Yeltsin had been Communist Party chief in Moscow. Popular, ambitious, he now used economic discontent to weaken Gorbachev and the Soviet Union. In May 1990, he was chosen parliamentary leader of the Russian Republic.
Yeltsin is a very good man for Russian people. Gorbachev, Bush, goodbye, 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 goodbye.
На каком-то этапе люди стали
People began to question Gorbachev's reforms.
политику Горбачева.
They started to listen to demagogues who promised that everything would be better tomorrow.
Завтра будет все хорошо.
Yeltsin's struggle with Gorbachev was out in the open. Russia, richest of the republics, would be Yeltsin's road to power.
Gorbachev would never really acknowledge that the Soviet Union would break up. Yeltsin recognized that it was inevitable. And he was one of the first to take the initiative, saying that Russia should declare its sovereignty and independence. Indeed, that's how he actually urged the other republics to become independent.
On the international scene, Gorbachev was still the man the West could do business with. At their meetings, Gorbachev asked Bush for help in his economic difficulties. Bush warned Gorbachev not to use violence if the Baltic states pushed for independence.
It looked like the Soviet Union was coming stuck a little bit. At that point, I think we started to believe we were in a race to try to finish the business of ending the Cold War with Gorbachev still in power.
The Red Army was pulling out of an Eastern Europe it had dominated for decades. In Germany, the troops would leave a question mark behind them. Divided by the Cold War, Germany was moving towards unification. Would the Soviet Union really allow a united Germany to belong to the West's military alliance, NATO?
Personally, for Gorbachev and for me, it wasn't a problem. But it was a problem for Soviet society, which had gone through the terrible war with fascist Germany and suffered the death of 20 or 30 million people.
They really ended up not having any other alternative. If they really meant what they said about we will not use force to keep the empire together, that meant that a country should be free to choose its own alliances.
The West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl undertook to limit Germany's military strength, to pay the Red Army's resettlement costs, not to station nuclear weapons in East Germany. Kohl was ecstatic. Gorbachev had accepted that a united Germany could belong to NATO.
We called the agreement between Gorbachev and Kohl VE Day 2 because it really was, that was the end of the Cold War.
A divided Germany at the heart of the Cold War was reunited. August the 2nd, 1990, Iraq invades Kuwait. Iraq was a Soviet ally. In spite of Iraqi-Soviet ties, Secretary of State Baker succeeded in persuading Shevardnadze to a joint condemnation of the invasion.
The minister has indicated that there was some difficulty on the part of the Soviet Union in coming to this agreement.
Shevardnadze had consulted Gorbachev, but he knew their hardline enemies would use it against them. In Moscow, the daily lines for food grew longer. Tempers rose.
Can you imagine we'd live to see the day when we needed coupons to buy socks? There weren't even any socks available. There was nothing on the shelves except out-of-date tins of fish. That was the result of perestroika. When Boris Nikolaevich Yeltsin suggested a new way forward, of course, people supported him.
Russia,
where Yeltsin and his radical Democrats were taking over, had practically declared independence from the Soviet Union. They adopted law after law that replaced the laws of the Soviet Union.
All that winter, Gorbachev was harassed by pressures from each side, for reform and against it. In December, Eduard Shevardnadze resigned. With Gorbachev stone-faced, he warned of a hardline coup.
So what, in terms of the Cold War here, what some in the United States government officials or in the State Department looks at the unification of Germany as a ending of the Cold War, as Condoleezza Rice had looked at it as victory in Europe a second time. In that here, if we look at what was the key symbol of the ideological divide between the United States and the Soviet Union, it was Germany, a divided Germany. Now it no longer is divided. And the only way Germany was able to unify and also with Berlin still being divided, is that the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France need to come back to the table and give clearance. Because technically, Berlin was still being occupied, especially the West Berlin side. And that's huge. And Helmut Kohl, Chancellor of West Germany, and then becomes the new leader of a unified Germany. As I kind of made a comment, was that he paid a lot of money. He did. He gave a lot of money to the Soviet Union to help resettle soldiers and kind of in some ways serve as reparations again for the Second World War. And many people in the Soviet Union were very upset with Mikhail Gorbachev over that. As Shevardnadze had said, 30 million people died in that war. And it's hard to put a price tag on that. So that's huge. But us in the United States, we're kind of celebrating. We're celebrating. Behind scenes, you know, they're giving high fives. Publicly, we're kind of measured in our response, knowing that the finish line is very close. And so we can't get too celebratory. But we are witnessing the end of the Soviet Union. And when it does collapse as a result of the coup, then we look at that as the final exclamation to the end of the Cold War. Huge. Any thoughts? Any thoughts about that? What we just saw? McDonald's, it's huge. You know, we got one in the CG and we think, well, you know, maybe we take it for granted. But open McDonald's in Moscow, that's huge. That's huge. And then when McDonald's opens in Beijing, that's going to be huge. All those things, because those are symbols. Those are symbols of the West. It's a symbol of capitalism. It's a symbol of something from the United States that we export. Huge. All right. So with that, your task is to look at the collapse of communism, and primarily in Eastern Europe, and you're highlighting 3 areas. You can work with a historical buddy. And so we'll work on this again today. And that'll be our task as well for tomorrow as well. Okay, so what I'll do is I will give you the rest of this time to have success, okay? All right, I'll cut you loose.